Hi ladies and gentlemen, welcome to AltSauce. Today we are going to be talking about the No Mo Non-Alcoholic IPA from the Crux Fermentation Project in Bend, Oregon. So Bend, Oregon, put on your finest lumberjack attire and let's find out more about this beer. Crux Fermentation Project. So I had to look this up a little bit. Crux Fermentation Project, I'm familiar with it. I'm actually an Oregon native. I don't live there any longer. I live up in Washington. But being in the Pacific Northwest, you see Crux Fermentation Project beers a lot. You see them in stores. You find them on tap. They're in a lot of places. And Crux is sort of known to be a pretty good producer of craft beer. But their name, Crux Fermentation Project, to me sounded a little long, a little odd, maybe a touch pretentious. So I did a little research on them and they are legit and they live up to what the name is. They really are. They are experimenting and it is a project of sorts with all things fermentation. So beyond just beer, they'll be fermenting alcohols and vegetables, so sauerkrauts and pickles and onions and things like that. If it ferments, it looks like Crux is doing it. And further than that, Crux is really pushing the boundaries with different brewing types. So using old world brewing techniques, new world brewing techniques, wild yeast strains, experimental hops, different ways of brewing, and they're producing some pretty amazing beers. So the Crux Fermentation Project No Mo Non-Alcoholic IPA only has 0.5% alcohol by volume. That's a pretty low amount. I think anything less than 0.5% qualifies it as an NA. I'll have to look that up to make sure. But this does hit right at 0.5%. More interesting than that, though, I think, is that this is a beer that only has 30 calories, 3 grams of carbs, and is an IPA from a craft brewer in Oregon. So 30 calories and 3 grams of carbs, that's like 1/10 of what you would get from a normal 7.5% IPA from a craft brew producer. You'd normally be seeing 300 calories and 30 or 40 grams of carbs out of a beer. So this is pretty amazing. The IBUs on this, it said in here somewhere, maybe I saw on the website, I think the IBUs are 10. So it's pretty low bitterness, which is interesting because normally when you think about IPAs tend to be quite bitter, quite hoppy. The hoppier, the more bitter. But this only has an IBU, I believe, of 10. Okay, so Crux Fermentation Project. Without further ado, let's go ahead and crack this open. Ooh, I love that sound. It looks like an IPA. And full disclosure, I have had this beer many times, so I actually know quite a bit about how this tastes already, but I wanted to share this with you. So this poured about as good as it pours. And by that, I mean that head that's on that beer is about as good as I can get it. This is interesting with this beer. Some beers, they are a little more challenging to get a decent head on the beer. This is one of those that I typically like to have a head in here of an inch or two. And this one, you can see it's settling really quickly here. It almost pours more like a seltzer than it does an actual beer. But nonetheless, the foam goes down pretty quick here, so it's not going to be super foamy. The texture maybe is just a little bit off, but if you smell it, it smells like a beer, and it sure smells like really fruity. Pineapple, tropical fruits, you get a lot of that in here. Yeah, and like I said, I've had this beer a lot. This is actually my go-to beer for every day. Because it's non-alcoholic, because it only has 30 calories, and because it only has 3 grams of carbs, I like to enjoy this because it's easy to include in there, and it has a really good flavor. It's really light-bodied. So if you like traditional IPAs, this really isn't that. And I'm surprised that they're calling this an IPA because this is, like I said, it's really low bitterness. It's kind of fruity. It's more like a fruit-forward pale ale or blonde even. But it doesn't really taste, doesn't have that bitterness that you would typically get from an IPA. Pretty cool color, pretty good color. You can see the head now is completely gone, even though it's only been about maybe a minute since I poured it, and it really does look like I've got a glass of LaCroix here or something with some coloring in it. So that is it from Crux Fermentation Project. I'm looking forward to them creating some more non-alcoholic IPAs in the future. I don't know if they're going to, or non-alcoholic beers in general. I would love it if they did. This is a really solid one. You can find it in stores in Oregon and Washington, and they have a fantastic website. So if you're not in Oregon or Washington, I think they deliver nationwide, or at least to most states. So Crux Fermentation Project, No Mo Non-Alcoholic IPA. I recommend it. Go buy it. And go out to altsauce.com to read a full review and our full scores on this beer. All right, thanks for watching.